Everybody, you are back. It is Jack Murphy. This is the Jack Murphy Live podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Jack Murphy Live, the website, jackmurphylive.com. The book is Democrat to Deplorable. It is available on Amazon. And my men's group is called the Liminal Order. And our three core values are brotherhood, masculinity, and sovereignty. If that interests you, come down, check us out at liminal-order.com. But today we have a guest that I've been wanting to have on for quite some time. His name is Kyle Shideler. He is the Director for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism at the Center for Security Policy, and he is an expert on Antifa. Kyle, how are you? Welcome to the Jack Murphy Live podcast.
It's great to be here, Jack. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. I saw your testimony in front of Congress. I read all of that, watched the video, and realized this was a guy that I had to talk to. Not to mention, you're also yet another member of the Claremont Network. I seem to be having a number of those guys on, doing great work out there, as always. Ryan Williams and team at Claremont. And so Antifa is something that we've been hearing about a ton in the news lately. For people who are sort of just coming to understand them, it can be kind of a confusing thing to understand what Antifa is, especially when we hear our politicians saying things like Antifa is just an idea, not an organization, which I laugh at because I personally have experience with Antifa as an organized domestic terror organization, in my opinion. A few years ago, they decided that I was supposed to be canceled. And so they found me, they doxed me, they contacted my employer, they contacted my Little League board, and they did everything they could do to ruin my life. And this was done by a woman who was flying an Antifa flag on the banner of her Twitter page, who claimed to be the head of the DC unit of Antifa. And she clearly marshaled forces of an organized online network to come after me. And so when people say Antifa is just an idea, I laugh. And we see everything that's been happening all summer long. And so we need to get the word out, and we need to understand exactly what's going on with Antifa. And that's why Kyle is here today. So we're going to get right into it. The first thing I want to do is I want to understand a little bit about you, Kyle. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to this position, your expertise, just a little bit of your background story so that the viewers can understand who we're talking to here?
Sure. So I guess my experience or interest in these sort of violent fringe political movements really began in about middle school, where when I decided that I was an anarcho-communist for a few years in about sixth grade. And I read Bakunin and I read Kropotkin, and I moved on to Lenin and What Is to Be Done. So I'm reading Lenin's What Is to Be Done in probably seventh grade. And I'm just totally fascinated by all of this stuff. And I liken it to what I call sort of the G.I. Joe Cobra syndrome, which is that the bad guys just had cooler stuff. Mm. It was just cool. The black leather car coat, the jaunty little cap, the Makarov. It's all cool. And I was really interested in all of it and fascinated in it. And I got interested in George Orwell, reading his account of the Spanish Civil War, which had, the role of the anarchists and their suppression by the communists, and all of this stuff was fascinating to me. And so I was always fascinated by revolutionary politics. But through reading Orwell and some other things I got into, I started to realize actually there's nothing truly revolutionary about these concepts at all. They never actually establish human freedom. And then I started saying, well, what would help establish human freedom? What would be a just system? And I got really into John Locke and the Second Treaty on Government, and through them into the founders. And I decided that actually the American founders had the best, most truly revolutionary understanding about how to establish a just society on the basis of true equality, of true political equality. And I decided that was it. I was going to be a defender of what the founders believed, and I was going to work against all of these various revolutionary movements that were trying to supplant that. So I became fascinated with that. I graduated from Boston University with a degree in politics and literature, and then I do what everybody does when they graduate with a liberal arts degree, and I moved over to my parents' garage. And I was there for a while until I got a job briefly as a radio journalist in a small town in North Georgia. It's actually the same town where they filmed the movie Deliverance.
Okay.
And so I had all these grand ideas and things I was interested in. And then during the day, I was covering county water sewer meetings. And so I started blogging and writing, and a group out in LA became interested in what I was doing. And they asked me to come on board and be a researcher. And that group was called Stand With Us. And what they did was they were tracking extremist groups targeting Jewish students on college campuses. And so that's where I honed my skills, actually digging into groups and organizations and tracking individuals and determining what they believe and why they believe it. Eventually, I made the jump to Washington, D.C., worked my way into the orbit of the Center for Security Policy. Actually, your prior guest, Dave Reboy, and I actually went up for the same job, and he beat me out. So he joined the center a little bit before I did. But I'm still there and still doing the same stuff. But this was during the period of the war on terror and our involvement in the Middle East. And so, as fascinated as I was with, violent leftist politics, it was Islamism and the Muslim Brotherhood and the jihadists that were the topic du jour. So I became very focused on that, focused on the Muslim Brotherhood movement, the Muslim Brotherhood inside the United States, and trying to, as best I could, figure out how their ideology informs their doctrine. Because what you believe determines how you organize, and it determines how you operate. And so when people say Antifa is just an idea, that's clearly nonsense. But they do have an idea. And if we understand what the idea is, we can understand how it will determine how they operate, and then we can try to defeat them.
So you're an obviously expert on this. You're qualified to talk about it. It's been a lifelong interest of yours. You do this professionally. You've been in front of Congress to talk about these matters. You know what you're doing. You know the lay of the land. So let's start at the top. Antifa is very important for all of us to understand today. You can go outside on a random Friday night in Washington, D.C., and encounter these groups of people marching through the city, demanding obedience, setting fires, even destroying property, assaulting police officers. I've seen it all happen firsthand. And we get this retort from the politicians that say Antifa is just an idea. Okay, well, let's start with the idea and then work our way through the entire thing, because I don't really think the general public has any idea of what's going on with Antifa, its history, its organization, its structure, how they've evolved, their tactics evolution, what their effectiveness is, and what the risk is that we face here in the United States domestically from a group that seems to have the only goal in mind, which is destroying the power and the reach of the United States government. So what is the idea? And then let's take it through their history and their organization and how they recruit, etc. Let's drill down deep. I want people to understand. So let's start at the top.
Sure. So I like to say, why don't we start at the beginning? And the beginning is about 1932 with the founding of Anti-Fascist Action in Weimar Republic, Germany. And it is founded as an arm of the Communist Party of Germany, which is itself controlled by the Stalin and the Comintern.
So let's just clarify that for 1 second, right? People think that communism and fascism are like the same thing. So how can these people be anti-communist or communist or fascist? Like, how does that work? If are communism and fascism the same thing? How are you against fascism but still a communist?
Sure. Well, so a lot of people like to say, well, they're anti-fascism, but they're actually being fascist in their behavior. And it's important to remember in Weimar Republic, in fact, almost every political party had a militia, because if you didn't, the other party militia would come and shut you down. And in fact, Antifa, despite the name, were not actually focused on fighting the Nazis. They were actually focused on fighting the Social Democrats and fighting the center left and the center right, because the strategic move was to force people to make a choice. You are either going to be supporting the communists or you're going to be supporting the Nazis. Mm-hmm. And their logic was, well, people are going to reject the Nazis and they'll come on board with the communists, and that's how we'll win. Turns out they were wrong about that. Mm-hmm. And so they end up getting suppressed. But that was the essential logic. And I like to start there because it's the same logic today. Antifa's goal is principally to force you to make a choice. You are either pro-Antifa, meaning literally you are pro-Antifa, you are part of their movement, or you are a fascist. Choose.
Mm. This sounds familiar, right? It sounds familiar, like either you're a racist or you're not a racist. Which is it?
Yeah. Well, if you listen to the language of like Ibrahim Kendi, right? You can't be not racist. You can only be racist or anti-racist.
That's right, anti-racist.
Right. If you are not on board with their entire program, you are a racist. In the same way that if you are not on board with Antifa, you are a fascist. And while they do fight, the occasional neo-Nazi group, their real goal is to prevent non-fascist groups from organizing and participating in politics, which they do very effectively by branding them as fascists. And then normal mainstream people don't want to have anything to do with them because normal mainstream people aren't fascists. And so then Antifa rules the streets, and there's no political opposition against them. And so that's the goal. And so it's an important thing to remember that Antifa operates with an understanding of revolutionary politics, not everyday normal modern politics where my party wins one year, your party wins the next year. They are looking at it as a system where the normal order has broken down, and so they can win with street politics. They can win with revolutionary politics, which has this threat of force behind it. But so they are suppressed. And we don't really hear about them again until the 1980s. So like most of the Western world, in Germany in the late 1960s, early 1970s, Germany is rocked by a series of communist urban guerrilla movements. For your listeners who have heard the term the Baader-Meinhof gang or Red Army faction, in Italy you had the Red Brigades. And these were communist urban guerrilla movements that were motivated in part by an ideology called autonomism. It's where we get the term autonomous. It's where you get Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, right? Where they made that decision to create that space. And so these guerrilla movements are suppressed by the German government and by the other European governments. And the ideology flows from them into what was then the German squatters' rights movement, which was part of a larger sort of punk, gutter punk rock scene. And they form a group called Antifa, and they proceed to fight with German police over their autonomous squats that they've set up. And they took over in some cases, because this is Germany, post-war. You got a lot of abandoned buildings, whole blocks abandoned, right, that they're slowly trying to gentrify and reestablish. And the squatters move in and take these things over and run them according to their autonomous politics, and then street fight with the police when the police try to break them up. It's where the term Black Bloc, for those of you who are familiar with that term, it's where that originated, was from the organization of fighting units against of the German squatters against the German police. So it then jumps the pond to London, and again the punk rock scene is where it's focused, and the punks are fighting with skinheads, and some skinheads are fighting against right wing or what they perceive to be fascist or neo-Nazi skinheads. And they latch on to this concept of Antifa and work to push out the right-wing punks or the neo-Nazi punks from the movement. It jumps from there to the United States, where you have a similar punk rock scene. But in the United States, nobody knows what a fascist is in the 1980s, or we're not really. It doesn't mean anything to us, and so they use the name anti-racist action instead of anti-fascist action. but it's the same group, same concept. And there, they link up with the remnants of America's communist urban guerrilla movement of the late 60s and 70s, a group which was known as the May 19th Communist Organization, or better known by their front organization, the John Brown Anti-Klan Committee. For your readers, I'll hold up a book called No Fascist USA, which came out a few years ago. And it is all about the John Brown Anti-Klan Committee and how it can inform today's Antifa movement. So the left understands this history that I'm giving you very well. And I derive this history from their own history. This is what they say happened. So I just take them at their word.
Mm-hmm. And so how does this idea survive the 30s and then sort of go away for a while and then come back in the 60s and then migrate to England and then over to the United States? How is the idea kept alive? How is the organization kept alive? Is there literature? Is there, a canon? Like, how does this information survive and get transmitted?
Absolutely. Well, revolutionary leftists, better than anyone, study their own history. So, as I was researching Antifa, one of the things I did was go to Marxist.org, which has a great repository of revolutionary leftist writing that's useful for studying. So on the one hand, you have the fact that leftists are just good at understanding their own doctrine and where they come from. And then, of course, you have the Cold War influence. So the communist urban guerrilla movements in Europe and the United States in the late 60s, early 70s, and into the early 80s did have ties to various communist governments. So in the German example, you've got ties to the East German Stasi. And in the U.S. example, you have ties between the Weather Underground, which then becomes May 19th Communist Organization, and the Cubans. And so there's an institutional memory in that way as well.
Weather Underground is connected to May 19th and John Brown.
Yes, that's right. So the Weather Underground, which is a term probably your audience is pretty familiar with, but towards the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, there's a split in the movement, and primarily the New York faction, an East Coast faction, goes on to found something called the May 19th Communist Organization, which decides to continue domestic terrorism as a model. They link up with the Black Liberation Army. They link up with the Puerto Rican FALN, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
and they continue to prosecute domestic terrorism in the United States.
I think it's important to point out in the late 60s, the Weather Underground was responsible for, I think, upwards of even like 1,000 bombings on college campuses in 1 year. Is that right? I mean, those late 60s were nuts for domestic terrorism.
That's right. I mean, you got the great book Days of Rage that is worth reading on this. You have the bombing in 1983 of the U.S. Senate office. You have the 1981 Brinks armored car robbery, very famous case. And so they were doing domestic terrorism into the late 80s, or into the early 80s. Most people don't know that, but it's true. You have, for example, Assata Shakur. For audience who's familiar with Assata Shakur, she was a leading member of the Black Liberation Army. She goes to jail for shooting a police officer. The May 19th Communist Organization breaks her out of jail and helps her escape to Cuba. And she's still in Cuba today and is still a martyr and mentor of revolutionary leftist politics in the United States. For example, you have one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement who described Assata Shakur as her mentor. You have the curious fact that BLM's early fiscal sponsor is this group called Thousand Currents, whose one of their board members was Susan Rosenberg, a May 19th Communist Organization member who was pardoned by Bill Clinton for her role in various criminal bombings and other terrorist acts. So these roots go deep. And I think it's really important that we understand that these roots go deep. This is not a new thing. Revolutionary leftist violence is not a new thing in the United States. by any stretch of the imagination. We just haven't seen it for a while.
Is there literature? Are there books? Are there, handbooks? Like, how do they transmit this information from generation to generation?
Sure, they teach it. They quite literally teach it in the academy, where a number of Weather Underground individuals went on to work. They fund it through various.
By the academy, you mean universities?
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, colleges and universities.
So they teach it in the universities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And they write books about it. You mentioned the handbook. The Antifa handbook was written by now former professor, I think, Mark Bray, it is literally a handbook on how to be Antifa. I mean, when he says handbook, he's not kidding.
Right.
And he relates a lot of this historical information about the roots of this concept of quote unquote anti-fascism. And so, I mean, and it does so fairly honestly. I mean, he does sort of say the goal of Antifa is to make it impossible to be a Trump supporter, for example. And so if you're labeling 45, 49% of the country fascist, we have to sort of question your judgment.
Right, exactly. So there's been a tie through history. There's a message that was born in 1930s in Germany. It has traveled the world. It has come to the United States. It was executed upon in the 60s and the 70s, into the 80s even. The literature lives on. They're educating people in these ideas and tactics within the universities. They're producing handbooks. They're disseminating information. And so how does Antifa evolve from the 80s into what we're seeing today?
Sure. So you have the anti-racist action groups. One of their leaders, the individual that runs Anti-Racist Action Los Angeles, was a former member of the Weather Underground and a former member of the John Brown Anti-Klan Committee. And they transition into he is the website registrar for Torch Antifa Network, which is the largest regional network of Antifa in the country, and is the regional network which Rose City Antifa is a member of. Rose City Antifa being the oldest known organization to go by Antifa in the United States. So you have a direct sort of lineal connection between the early days of anti-racist action and the Antifa of today as sort of the leadership level. They don't like the term leadership because they're anarchists, but they do have methods of decision making, and some people are in fact more important than others. But you have a lot of evolution of thinking. They are in a lot of ways, because they're anarchists and because they are anarchist organized, they had a jump on a lot of the fourth generation warfare, networked insurgency models that we're only now thinking about because of our fights in the Middle East with the various jihadists. But the anarchist model of organizing was way ahead of all these guys in terms of doing that. And so
fourth generation
we should know better.
Fourth generation warfare is something that we've studied and talked about quite a bit on this podcast. We've got John Robb, who is a regular contributor. He's coming back again to talk about fourth generation warfare. Within the liminal order, fourth generation warfare is a fundamental concept that we study. And we study it because the fourth generation warfare, as it's being conducted today, is not necessarily tied to nation states. It's tied to ideas and to causes and even to gangs. And it is a conflict that has no clearly set defined battlefield. It has no clear set participants. You're not wearing a uniform. You don't have identification as being a combatant. And it's all around us at all times. And primarily today, we're seeing it through, well, not just primarily anymore, man, it's kind of sad, but through information warfare, propaganda, mind control, bending perceptions, changing notions of reality, disinformation, misinformation, all kinds of campaigns. And for example, the way that it's coordinated is it's emergent, but it seems so deliberate. It's almost if they're acting in unison. I remember early on in the riots this summer, after I had come back from covering the riots downtown, And I come back and I'm sitting on my back porch just debriefing, and I get an email from the PTA of my local school, and the PTA is sending out a list of books to read from the Anti-Defamation League, and at the top of the list is White Fragility and Anti-Racism, and they're saying, hey, parents, read these books and then tell your kids to read them, and you guys talk about it around the dinner table. And it was there where it really just hit me that I just had seen on the ground an emergent conflict with street warriors setting buildings on fire, throwing bombs at cops, attacking people, destroying property, committing felony after felony after felony, setting cars on fire. And then I get home and I get an email telling my kids that they're supposed to read Anti-Racist and White Fragility. And that's when it all just, boom, it just collided in my head that this is a war that's happening on multiple levels, on a physical level, on a mental level, on a moral level. It happens with kinetic energy. It happens with information, and it's happening in a decentralized way, which is something that we all need to understand these days. Decentralization is the theme of the 2020s. It will be the theme of the 2030s. It's because the last 50 years, all we've done is consolidate and then expand and eliminate our borders and our boundaries in a top-down capacity. But today, the battle is emergent, and it's between networks. And the networks don't always have allegiances to nation states. They have allegiances to ideas and causes and missions. And so it is happening everywhere. And I'm glad you brought up the fourth generation warfare element, because if people will say things like Antifa is an idea, well, then so is ISIS. And ISIS operates in, I think, a similar fashion in terms of its decentralized network. So what I'm asking you to translate for us is like, how does this military doctrine, this fourth generation warfare, how does it like realize itself with Antifa? How do they organize? Why is that organization form dangerous? And how come we can see it all around us on every level, at every turn, basically?
Right. So there's one is the sort of anarchist model of organization, which the core level of, think of it as if you're in a structured military system as your fire team, your very smallest unit of organization is what the anarchists call an affinity group, which is literally just the people with whom you have an affinity, meaning your friends, people you like, people who agree with you, who have a shared vision of what you want to do, and then who go do it. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty basic, but it's pretty effective. And from there, you can structure affinity groups through various clusters. You can do decision making through consensus, which is how they do most of their decision making, is through consensus building, through spokes councils. It's what they call spokes councils. You saw people who watched the Occupy movement during that period saw this happen in real time, and they thought it was kind of funny, and they made fun of it with the microphone check and this, that, and the other thing. But it is an effective method of organizing for people who have a shared vision.
What they rally around is this thing called the plausible promise, right? Like they see something that's possibly effective. Someone tries a tactic, they see it's effective, and then they start to rally around this idea that, oh, this thing that we want to do is actually possible, right? And so what is it that they want to do? What is their plausible promise? What is rallying these affinity groups to come together and sort of copycat each other's tactics, get together into these councils you're talking about, and then make their decisions that way? Like, what is their plausible promise at this point?
Fundamentally, it's to supplant and overthrow the state at the highest level. And you see their instinct to do that with the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Right. As soon as it became possible, they had forced out the police. They established a zone, and they tried to govern a small polity in accordance with their ideas. Didn't last very long, but that was the goal, and they saw it, and for a moment it lived. Right. And that's a very powerful thing for an idea. That to say we had a space where we existed in the real world for a time. And you made the connection to ISIS, and it was part of what made ISIS so dangerous was their claim that we have established the caliphate, we have done it in the real world, even if it only lived for a time, yet it has still lived, right? And that's a very powerful idea. and that they say, we are living our ideology. We are making our decisions in an anarchist ideologically approved way, and we can show that it works. It works in the real world. We can outmaneuver the state. We can outmaneuver the cops in this through these means, and it seems to be working. And so they take that seriously, and it bolsters them. It makes them feel like they're winning. And by the way, I mean, in my opinion, they are winning. Do they win a single riot? No, right? That's the trick about the police. That's why the police are the police, is you always lose. Because more police come and more state power comes, and the more you defeat them, the more they respond, until eventually you're defeated.
Right. But
on the physical level, but on the ideological level, you're winning.
Right. So I've studied both Rules for Radicals, Alinsky, and the Antifa handbook, and I've observed them in practice. And I think that there's some element of them knowing that the escalation that they cannot win is still a victory for themselves, because what they look for are weaknesses and then points of attack where they can elicit a response. And so they find an area in which there's a weakness. And in the early days of the riots in DC in 2020, the police, the Park Police, National Guard, etc., they came and formed a physical barrier with the law enforcement around Lafayette Park to keep people out. There were no fences, there were no permanent barriers. And so it actually created this very intense flashpoint, right? And so they, with their tactics, and we can talk about their riot tactics and the various members and roles that they have to play, but they would attack the police and just provoke and provoke and provoke and provoke. And all they really want is for the police to overreact and to respond in a way that gives them another round of energy. And you can actually feel, when you're in the mob, you can feel the energy swells and crests, and you can feel them come down. And then you can tell where the night is headed by each additional crest having sort of a higher energy to it. And so they just attack and provoke and attack. And it caused for a huge problem, big disaster, lots of conflict. And so eventually the Trump administration and local police got smart, and they took the cops out of the way, and they put up physical barriers. And it's very difficult for the Antifa to get a response out of a physical barrier. And that actually dispersed a lot of the energy. So it's interesting to see here how they want to get a response. Sometimes they get one that they like they did in Portland at the federal courthouse, right? This continuous antagonism. But then sometimes they get outsmarted, where you take the flashpoints away, and then they're basically just standing in the middle of the street yelling at a brick wall. But nevertheless, they do seem to be winning the messaging war at times. What do you think about that right now? Where are we there with their messaging war and the war of ideas and such?
Well, that, when I said I thought they were winning, that's where they're winning. They're winning in the messaging war, and they're winning in the war of ideas. The example I would give for this is the situation where federal law enforcement in Portland started making arrests of Antifa organizers after major protests, and those who had been caught on camera doing various violent acts. So they just, instead of trying to dive into the middle of the protest and arrest the guy right there, which is what you would have traditionally done, they said, let's not do that. Let's not antagonize people. We'll make the arrest afterwards, which is I understand the logic. That's a pretty smart move. Mm-hmm. So what does Antifa do? Antifa turns around and films these arrests. You've got law enforcement guys snatching people up, putting them in minivans, and they're in an unmarked car. Why? Because they don't want to start another riot, which is, if they were in a police car, the mob would have burned the police car. So they're in an unmarked car. And so Antifa videotapes this. They say, oh, look, unmarked, federal militia Trump troops are arresting us. They put that video on social media. It immediately gets grabbed by the mainstream media, which runs with it without a comment, without any criticism or fact checking, and in fact, stating things that were factually untrue, like the law enforcement individuals were unmarked, which is not true. They did have markings. Right.
And
And then,
even so, it's okay if they're unmarked because hey, that's that's how things get done, right?
yeah, I mean, in fact, that's not a requirement in a lot of places. I mean, I mean, they have to say they're police and they have a badge or whatever, but a lot of people get arrested by police in suits all the time.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the phrase plain clothes? I mean, come on, this is something
Yeah.
that's pretty common.
But so mainstream media runs with this claim, and then it gets echoed by, Democratic senators, Democratic members of the House, including the Speaker of the House, and they organize an entire hearing on it. Or the hearing that I spoke at, before I spoke, the previous panel was the government panel, and the Democratic senators proceeded to grill Ken Cuccinelli from DHS for hours about this factually untrue claim that was promoted by Antifa. That by any metric is a huge information operation win.
Right.
You have people who are supposed to be on the other side, that is, representing the U.S. government, your opponent, speaking the words that you put in their mouth. That's an operation. That's an information operation win.
Yeah.
And that's how Antifa operates, right? Because that feeds into our claims that the opposition is fascist are true. Even the Democratic senators are saying that our claims are true, that the Trump regime is a fascist regime. And therefore, if the Trump regime is a fascist regime, the only appropriate response is anti-fascism.
Yeah.
And so we feed people back into the movement to support us, and then we can do the next operation.
Yep. There's a continuous feedback cycle, and it is really important for us to point out the media connection to Antifa. They can't look, it's one thing for guys like me to just run independent information outlets and operations and try to do our part to put what we want out into the information space. And I think I'm doing a good job, but I don't have leading government officials and politicians and the presidential candidates, plus all of the mainstream legacy media echoing and reinforcing uncritically my claims. That'd be great. Thank you. But it's not happening.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, but it's not happening. So what do you see as the connection between legacy media and Antifa? Why does there seem to be a conduit between their actions straight into the media, right to the government, back to the media, and then straight into American people's brains? Why does it seem to flow so seamlessly, effortlessly, almost as if it's all planned and coordinated? What is the connection there?
So from my time studying the Islamists and the jihadists, one of the things I like to say is if everybody is on the same page doctrinally, you all have the same doctrine, you all have the same ideology, you don't actually need a conspiracy because everybody knows what their job is.
Right.
And so, when the Antifa guys throw the video up on social media, they know with certainty that, various leftist reporters, it may not be the guys at the top level, at the Wall Street, at the Washington Post or New York Times or something, but, the guys at Slate, the guys at Mother Jones, the guys at
Post.
Yeah, they're going to run it uncritically, right?
Yeah.
And once it does, it moves a step up the legitimacy ladder. And then the Washington Post or the New York Times will cite from this leftist, blog or whatever it is, news outlet saying, here's what happened. And they just cite it uncritically. And then, of course, the Democratic senators will cite the Washington Post uncritically. And so you launder claims this way through various levels of authenticity, and you get different audiences. You have to reach different audiences through different ways.
Do you think the media knows that they're actively aiding and abetting this organization, or do you think they're just like, oh, this is the news, I'm going to report the news?
I don't think they think there's anything wrong with it. I mean, look how many blue check mark media reporters will tweet out, Antifa just means anti-fascist. How can you be against anti-fascism? Or, that they like to do the thing where they post the picture from Normandy and they say, our grandparents were anti-fascists or some such nonsense. And, and so if that's where your head is at,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you? Why
Right.
wouldn't you echo these claims? If you're in the fiery but mostly peaceful crowd of CNN, where all of these riots are just protests, then you are pre-primed to accept their propaganda uncritically, and so you do.
Yeah. And so what's great to point out here is this, again, it's an emergent phenomenon, right? It's as much as it would be fun to be like, there's one guy with the marionette and he's like taking control and guiding everything. It's not. This is an emergent network phenomenon. They rally around a plausible promise and an ideology. And as you say, you don't need a conspiracy when everybody knows the role that they're supposed to play. That is a really excellent point. Because it does feel like it's top-down coordinated, but it really is. We're experiencing what John Robb calls network alignment. We're watching an alignment between these networks of the anti-fascists, the networks of Black Lives Matter, and the critical race theory folks. We are watching an alignment of the corporations, the media, and elements of the federal government, the blue church, as coined by Jordan Greenhall. And so these are very disparate groups, but they have a common goal at the moment, and they are currently networked aligned. And that's around diminishing the power of the federal government. It's around diminishing the reputation and branding, if you will, of the federal government and of Trump and Trump supporters. And interestingly, in reading Matt Stoller and understanding the complete lack of antitrust work that's been going on for the last 4 decades or so, it's interesting to see how there's an alignment between the corporations and the blue church and Antifa and Black Lives Matter right now, because they're all kind of getting what they want out of it. The corporations aren't getting messed with on antitrust level. Black Lives Matter and Antifa are getting their messages out there, and everybody just is rallied around calling Donald Trump a fascist, and anyone who supports him a fascist as well, including me. They called me a fascist and a Nazi. And instead of going away into the night, here I am. We're going to bring even more sunshine to disinfect this nonsense. And so the current environment, we've been, while in the 60s, the bombings and the civil distress was much greater. When we've got presidents being assassinated, Martin Luther King getting assassinated, just cold-blooded killings. I mean, although we've seen that now, and 1,000 bombings on college campuses, we're seeing an escalation now in tactics and in violence. And one of the things that really stood out to me was clearly what happened in Portland, where it appeared that an Antifa kill squad basically took to the streets in search of a Trump supporter in a group of people. They identified him. They called him out. They were video recording it. They shot the guy right in the street. They ran away. The guy had a place to go to. He bunkers down with a machine gun. And when the cops finally come to get him, there's a crazy Wild West shootout. So are we seeing an escalation in violence? Are we seeing an escalation in tactics? Do they train this stuff? Are there people who are like, okay, this is how we're going to coordinate a kill team? And then do they practice? Do they think about it? Because I have looked at that video a million times. I interviewed a guy who filmed it live. We went over all the footage, and it's very clear that they were moving in a coordinated fashion. They were in front of the target. They were behind the target. They blocked the road. I mean, it was crazy what happened. Are these people training? Are they planning to escalate? How do they decide how to do this? Talk us through that.
Sure. So the first thing I think is worth pointing out is that they are a low intensity violence, and they're a low intensity insurgency in terms of their violence, because that's a choice that they have made, right? It's actually, you think about it, it's actually a showing of how dangerous and capable they are, that they're not more violent. Because actually, when you're jacking up your followers to go fight fascists, and you're telling them that any one of these Trump supporters could have a knife and they're going to stab you, right? Which is what they tell people this all the time. Or they tell people, why do you think we have seen so many shootings at these roadblocks? And it's because they have told their followers, white supremacists in cars are going to run you over. And so they're jittery at the roadblocks because they expect a white supremacist to come run them over.
Right.
And when some civilian gets scared and hits the gas, they shoot him because, in their mind, oh, here's the white supremacist. They told me he was going to come run me over. And then, of course, you've got like NPR, like uncritically running this same claim.
Right.
So the fact that they're not more violent is actually an example of their organization and their capability. I think we are seeing an increase in violence. I mean, we're seeing an increase in capability and tactics, deploying these, high-powered lasers to blind people. Deliberately blinding people is a malicious wounding. In a lot of states, that would be considered justification for the use of lethal force.
Right.
It's a serious act to deliberately blind someone.
Yeah.
Throwing a Molotov cocktail at someone is a lethal act. You may not hit them, but if you did, it would be potentially lethal. So they are certainly willing to engage in lethal violence.
Yeah.
The killing of the Trump supporter, I don't know how intentional it was, but they were clearly prepared to do that. And I think it's an example of an insurgency that has established themselves as a shadow government, and they have space that they consider our space.
Whose streets? Our
Whose
streets.
streets? Our streets. And so they genuinely believe that Portland belongs to Antifa, and you do not get to be a Trump supporter in Portland. That is their position. I don't know if you saw the interview with the lady on the streets of Portland who
Sure did.
presumably seems just to be a civilian, but she was completely unapologetic and said, well, he shouldn't have been in Portland. It is for, I've talked to people that, served in Iraq and served in Afghanistan, and they'd say, it's the same thing. Or, you talk to law enforcement on the gang squad, right? And they'll say, if you belong to a group and you go into the other group's area, a shooting will occur. Is it planned? Is it required to be planned? I believe that was a hasty ambush, in which case they saw him coming and then were able to quickly prepare it, which again says something about organization and capability.
Right.
But he did not have a right to be there in their view, and they acted immediately to respond to it. But the question, do they train? Yes, they do. I mean, we've seen. We know before major protests, they will encourage people to attend what they call nonviolent training, but it's where they get a lot of this practice for how to act as a human shield, how to speak to police when you're on the line. It's not, you see the same behavior from them, whether you're in DC or Los Angeles or Chicago. They speak in a certain way, they provoke in a certain way, and it's very effective, by the way.
Yes.
And so all of that is trained, and they train, de-arresting people from the police. All of these things are trained in advance.
Right. De-arresting. That's when the police grab a guy and then 10 people swarm on the cop and drag their Antifa brother out of the law enforcement's hands. And one of the videos that I saw that really hammered home to me what was going on, it was back in the early days of George Floyd protest riots. And there was this guy who was just filming what was going on the street. He didn't seem to me to be a political, sort of participant. And he observed a group of 4 or 5 people in a very systematic and coordinated way bash in the windows of a car, go get fuel, lighter fluid, or some sort of, igniter. Then they come back, they fill in the car, filled it up with lighter fluid. The guys with skateboards were both coordinated in them bashing in the front and back windows and the side windows. And then one person goes away and then comes back. Another person goes away, come back. And then they light the car on fire. And it all happens in a matter of like 1 minute. And there was just no way that that was something that was random or spontaneous. They had the lighter fluid in their backpacks. They had the skateboards to use as weapons. They moved one person in to do the demo. That person moved out. Someone moved in to do the, plant the fuel. And then someone else came in and lit it. And it just happened so quickly and in such an organized fashion. There was no question in my mind that they practiced it. And in fact, they might have even planted the car in the street in the first place beforehand, because it was a cop car that had been stripped of its sirens and whatever. And it was like, why is it even there? And so there's clearly coordination. Some people speculate that the pallets of bricks that were found around were part of this coordination. I don't know so much about that. But I do see the tactics evolving, and it troubles me. And you're right that you can see these replicated in any city that you go to. And I found a graphic once that was basically mapping out the Hong Kong protests. And there's all these different players, right? You've got, they call them the mages or whatever, the guys with the laser pointers. You've got the
light mages, yeah.
Light mages. You've got the people with the shields that are up in front. They actually manufacture shields. They have people that get together and build them. You can imagine they're having like a fucking picnic, and they're like, just building shields. We're building shields for the battle tonight, guys. And they've got these shield people, and then they've got people whose job it is to launch projectiles from back behind the lines. They've got people who are geared to be medics. They've got people with food and water supplies. They've got eyes in the sky. They've got social media people following all the police scanners, all Twitter accounts, public available cameras. They're reporting police movements. They're reporting the movements of the other groups. They're calling people out for trainings. I mean, it is a whole system in place, and it moves from town to town. It can pop up anywhere. And we saw a very clear call to action from people on the West Coast, Portland folks, to move to DC to start doing, laying a siege is what they were saying. And it wasn't just speculation that they were moving across the country. The van that was on the ground in Portland was on the ground in my hometown of DuPont Circle. I couldn't believe it. I laughed when the cop walked up, smashed the window, and dragged the guy out of there. And then people who had been arrested in Oregon had been arrested in DC now. And so they're spreading, they're replicating, they're escalating. And I'm starting to wonder now, who's funding all of this? Is there funding? Where does it come from? Where does the money come from? Where does the support come from?
Right. So my experience has been that most of the stuff that they bring to the riots are relatively inexpensive. Even the lasers and stuff, not too expensive.
Yeah.
And they sort of get better at this as they go, but you show up, somebody will hand you a shield. Do you have any idea where the shield came from? You don't, but somebody will hand it to you. And if you want one, if you'd be willing to throw it, somebody will hand you a Molotov cocktail. Do you know where it came from? You probably don't. But if you're willing to throw a Molotov cocktail, there will be one available for you to throw, right? Those things aren't terribly expensive, and they're able to raise a lot of money on some of these fundraising sites. Some are deliberately ideological fundraising sites, and some of them are neutral fundraising sites that just happen to let it go on. But that stuff doesn't cost a lot of money. What costs money is transportation. What costs money is logistics, hotel bills. There's an example of there's a hotel out in just outside of DC in one of the outlying counties, which has been the base of operations for Richmond and DC, according to what I've been told. And they've been
that information now offline. I'd love to know
they've been there for weeks. Hotel bills cost money, and stuff costs money. During the harassment of the RNC convention when they were coming out of the White House, a lot of the people there said the protesters or the harassers were staying in the same hotel.
Yeah, let's talk about that for 1 second.
It's not cheap. So where does that money come from?
Let's talk. We'll come back. I just have a story to tell there. I was there on the ground that night. I was on 15th Street between the White House and the hotel district right there. And I observed all these people coming out of the White House and getting harassed on the street. And I guided them away from the mobs into safety. And then at one point I noticed Rand Paul was there. And so I went up to him and I was like, Rand, you cannot be here. You're going to get attacked. And then we found one cop. We got him behind a cop. We waited for like 15 minutes. The mob surrounded everybody. We waited for the police to come to escort him away. And the next day, I'm talking to Rand's people, and they're telling me that they could hear in their hotel rooms through the walls, they could hear agitators organizing, talking about Rand Paul being in the hotel. We came here to do this. What are we going to do? How do we do this? Where is he? What? And he was totally blown away that they were, paid to be put in the W Hotel 1 block away from the White House. It takes money, it takes logistics, it takes planning. Now, let's not just assume that every Antifa scrub is completely poor. There is an ideological connection to people with money who want to support the same plausible promise. And so they're willing to contribute money. One of the ways that I've seen them contribute a substantial amount of money is not actually through cash, but in-kind service donations. So what they do is when they're getting ready to go out to riot, they're like, okay, here's the phone number to call if you get arrested tonight. And they have big black Sharpies, and they all write the phone number on their forearm. And the phone person at the other end of that phone number is a pro bono legal counsel who is there to represent them, get them off without any bail, get them back out on the street, and then represent them if something happens to them in court down the road. And so when you can operate with a sense of relative impunity, that is as powerful as giving somebody like $1 million. If you know that you can go out, get arrested, have a lawyer, have a medical team, have food supplies, have your bombs there, your shields there, your bricks there, have people with your back looking out for you on social media and cameras and security and stuff, you basically are experiencing the benefits of being a part of an actual sort of national mobilized military force, without it having to be a top-down controlled, there's a general and a colonel and a whatever controlling all of the troops. And so this funding is something that we really, I think, need to track and we need to watch. What else have you seen in terms of crowdfunding or money from abroad? Has any money from international sources come into play here?
Sure. So the numbers on let's start with the numbers on the arm. That's almost always the National Lawyers Guild, which exists for this purpose, right? They exist to bail out rioters and protesters, and they have since the 50s bailed out and defended subversives and revolutionaries since they were founded by members of the Communist Party in the United States. So that's their role, right? And then you've got the bail funds that are being set up to bail people out, right? Which are flush with millions and millions of dollars out of the Black Lives Matter movement. So you have the Black Lives Matter, various Black Lives Matter organizations, and they're supporting a variety of different groups, but especially these bail funds, and then tons of money flowing into them from corporations, from left-wing foundations.
Hundreds of millions of dollars.
A lot of money. I heard $2 billion over the past several months. I don't know if that's exactly right, but we're talking serious cash. Some of it's going to go missing. Some of it's going to end up in or go missing into the right hands or wrong hands, depending on how you look at it. And so one of the things that I've been pushing really hard at looking at is how does this money move from these quasi-respectable, actually, I should say they are really respectable. They would be considered more respectable than me. The Tides Foundation, the Open Society Foundations, these sorts of really, the Ford Foundation, really large, well-funded foundations. How does money from them end up in these other groups? Well, I'll give you an example that I used in my testimony that I think is illustrative, which is how is Refuse Fascism funded? Refuse Fascism is a front organization of the Revolutionary Communist Party. You see these guys at a lot of these protests. And they were, for a time, their fiscal sponsor was a group called the Alliance for Global Justice. The Alliance for Global Justice is a nonprofit out of Phoenix, Arizona, that funds a lot of different groups by acting as their fiscal sponsor. And what that means is they're a registered 501c3 that can receive tax-deductible donations from any foundation. And most foundations have to give money to a registered 501c3. They can't just give money to any bum on the street. So money moves from the foundations to the fiscal sponsor, which is Alliance for Global Justice in this case. Now, Alliance for Global Justice used to be the Nicaragua Network, which was an organization set up to support the Sandinistas in the 80s. Back when we were fighting communist insurgencies in Latin America. But they've transitioned to the Alliance for Global Justice. They support over 100 different groups as their fiscal sponsor, one of which was Refuse Fascism. And money flows from these organizations, from these foundations, into the 501c3 fiscal sponsor, which then in turn distributes them to the less reputable groups like the Revolutionary Communist Party. We know that from videos that were done by Project Veritas, that groups like Refuse Fascism seem to know where the original money came from. There's a video that the Project Veritas released where they talk about getting money from Open Society to support Refuse Fascism, for example. So there seems to be some coordination there, but it's all very clean. So I've urged legislators to look at this fiscal sponsorship arrangement to figure out how to better track where money actually goes after it goes into the hands of the fiscal sponsor and then off to some some group that doesn't have any kind of charter or any kind of official organization.
So there's international money, there's corporate money, there's money from Soros, there's money from frickin' Nike, there's money from Bank of America, I remember was a big contributor. There's ties to communists and are there ties to Islamists as well? I mean, this is like a global network of funding and organization and transmission. I mean, when someone says this is an idea, what does an idea need funding? What does an idea need for training? What does an idea need for bail funds and medics and eyes in the sky and intelligence networks if they're not coordinating action? By the way, guys, the idea Antifa is anti-fascist action. It's like the idea is to take action. So we can say it's an idea, but it's an idea to do something.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when they say, well, it's just an idea to be anti-fascist, it's like, well, it's an idea to take action.
Right. And
that's the fundamental point.
Right.
And,
right.
You talk about the intelligence or the different elements. And one of the ways that they achieve this is through this concept of diversity of tactics. Right. So you may be somebody that believes what Antifa believes, but you don't have the guts to pick up a shield or throw a Molotov cocktail.
Mm-hmm.
They're okay with that. That's fine. Are you really good with computers? Do you know how to dox people? All right, that's your job.
Right.
Do you know how to track social media? And okay, that's your job. They're all about do what you are comfortable doing for the movement.
Right.
And this is a really powerful concept, and it allows you to mobilize a larger group of people than you would get if you were, some kind of strict terror group. And you're like, okay, if you want to join us, off to Afghanistan you go, pick up a Kalashnikov. You're like, whoa, that's not, I want to help you, but that's not how I want to help you.
Right.
You get a lot further with this kind of diversity of tactics. We will find a way to fit you into the network. Right. And they do.
That is an interesting point. It's almost as if they've raised the militia. They have raised the militia. They are working in coordination to fight against this spirit of America, the American power and presence within their own country. Like, oh, crazy. There's American might within its own country. Let's attack it. But what's fascinating also is that there is a response to this. People are raising up their own militias, and I don't necessarily mean physical. I mean information militias. We see it happening. We see the sort of emergence of a counter force in terms of the information space. This is an example of an emerging force against the information space. And I'm wondering, as their tactics increase in force and in scope and become more refined, what the response is going to be from the people and what the response is going to be from the government. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what does the government really know? I heard Ray the other day say that white supremacists are the biggest threat we face domestically. A whole bunch of horse crap there. What do they really know at DHS and at the FBI? And what does the Trump administration really know? And what are they actually doing, if anything? And then after we talk about all that, let's talk about what we should be doing. So what is happening right now? What does the government know for sure? And what kind of action are they taking?
Well, I'll say certainly they know less than they should. We can start with that. I think the Attorney General has been on point. Bill Barr, he seems to get this. Some of his statements early on, he said these are revolutionary groups, right? That's an important statement from the Attorney General. If the Attorney General says you are a revolutionary group, that your group seeks to overthrow the government of the United States, that's actually not something you're allowed to do, believe it or not.
Right.
We haven't enforced the law on that in a long, long time. But as a matter of fact, as they say, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. and there are elements that allow the government to defend itself from those who would overthrow the Constitution. So it's important when he says things like that. I think President Trump himself gets it on sort of an instinctive level. When he said at the debate, when Joe Biden said, this is just an idea, and he said, they will overthrow you, Joe, right? He understands at some sort of instinctive level what they are. And I thought that was very positive. Director Wray I've just not been impressed. The FBI, ironically, the FBI was founded in part to respond to anarchist insurrections. In the 1920s, you had like the Palmer raids in the 1920s to arrest anarchists and communists who were conducting a small bombing campaign. So this is the FBI's bread and butter, or at least it's supposed to be. And yet they've been really bad on it. You saw that their primer on what they call anarchist extremism, which is how they define Antifa or any group like it. It says these are just individuals. Anarchism is fine as long as there's no action to overthrow the state. They say, most of the laws that these guys break are local laws, and therefore local law enforcement is responsible for dealing with it. Well, now that's true if you believe that the individual who smashed in that car and set it on fire, all he did was commit arson and vandalism. Those are local crimes. That is true. But if you understand that he did it in alignment with a movement that is seeking to overthrow the Constitution, well, guess what? That's a federal crime. That's a federal responsibility to defend the Constitution and to defend the state government from an insurrectionary force that seeks to displace it. So those are federal crimes. And if you understood Antifa correctly, you would understand that those are federal crimes. Bill Barr, he had a conversation with some of his prosecutors, and he said we should be looking at seditious conspiracy as a potential avenue towards making arrests. A seditious conspiracy, it sounds like it's about sedition and things that you say against the government. In fact, it has nothing to do with what you say against the government. It has to do with what you do against the government. And if you assault a federal building, if you deliberately and through violence prevent federal law enforcement or federal officials from doing their jobs, that is a federal crime known as, and you conspire to do it with other individuals. That's a federal crime known as seditious conspiracy, and you go to jail. You can go to jail for 20 years for that. It's a serious offense. So there are laws that we can use, but they require that you understand that there's a level of organization involved that's interstate, that is conspiring in the realist sense of the term. You have to understand that. If you don't admit that, then you can't deploy these tools because they require a conspiracy between multiple individuals, and they require a goal of seeking to overthrow the state.
Do you think the people?
If you think these are social justice protests, then you completely negate those tools and you ignore them.
Do you think that the people who we count on to defend us, the Constitution, our property, federal property. And let's not forget that, like, defending life and property is what police and law enforcement are supposed to do. And they train the police and law enforcement to consider property as an important thing to protect his life, because, hey, this is freaking America. And that's what we're all about, is protecting personal property and privacy and property rights.
It's second only to life and liberty.
Right, exactly. And so, do you think that the people that we're supposed to be relying upon within the federal government to protect us and to put down these types of insurgencies, are they ignorant? Are they dumb? Are they co-opted? Are they guilty? I mean, I'm getting to the point now where I'm thinking you're either with us or you're against us in this regard, meaning you can't, there's no chance that a national security official is ignorant of what's happening here unless they're willfully ignorant. So that's my take. What's your take? Like, do these people know what the hell's going on? Are they just being stupid? Are they getting played? Are they on the other side? What's happening?
I think there's a big swing. I will tell you for certain that there are federal agents that get this, that want nothing better than to be let off the leash to do what they do and bring these guys down. I can tell you that there are law enforcement officers who know nothing of what I told you about the history of Antifa, where it came from, or what it's for and what it does and how it operates, but they'd like to know. They're not getting that information, but they would like it. And if they got it, they would do the right thing. There are absolutely people in the government that genuinely believe that essentially the idea behind the protesters is right, that, you know, somehow this is justified, and they don't want to take action. They want to deal with other things that they consider genuine threats, right? You see, that's part of why you get this giant, white supremacy is the largest threat. In part because, as you know, we've talked about critical race theory and other things that they've pushed into academia and so forth. If you believe that, then you believe white supremacy is everywhere. Well, then certainly white supremacy would be the largest threat, wouldn't it?
Right.
And it comes from, the way they count up who, what groups killed who and so on and so forth, to say, well, a white supremacist killed 24 people. That adds up to a pretty large total. And if you're only interested in deaths, if you're only paying attention to who is killed, then you might say, well, that's the greatest threat. But that's not actually your responsibility as a federal law enforcement officer. Your fundamental responsibility is to the defense of the Constitution. And so the group that poses the largest threat to the Constitution and to the government that Constitution creates, that is the largest threat. That is the threat you are most responsible for dealing with. And if you approach it in those terms, then I think it's undeniable that Antifa is a larger threat than white supremacy. But they have not been trained to think in those terms for many, many years.
Yeah. I wonder what we can do to spread awareness. I mean, I'm doing everything I can. I talk to people in the administration. I know that there are some people who, quote, get it. I know that there's some people that totally understand the fourth generation warfare aspects that are happening here. They understand network alignment. They understand plausible promises. They understand that Antifa is an actual physical terror group, that they kill people, they destroy buildings, they use intimidation and violence as a way to advance political causes, as a way to strike fear and terror in the citizenry, which I believe are the definitions of terrorism right there. And it just astonishes me, the lack of ignorance, or not the lack, the depth of the ignorance across basically everywhere on this matter. And I liken it as well to, just like your regular mom in Bethesda who's like, Black Lives Matter. Yeah, of course Black Lives Matter. I think that's great. But she has no idea that Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization that believes in the destruction of the nuclear family and the breakdown of anything outside of yourself, the breakdown of any tie to anything greater, any nationalism, any patriotism, your community, your family. They want to destroy all of that. But hey, Black Lives Matter for sure. And there's signs in their yards and they tell their teenage daughters Black Lives Matter and such. So I think that the information warfare has been tremendously successful on Antifa's part and Black Lives Matter's part. and to the point where they're able to rally foot soldiers that know not what they really do. And I try to tell my normie friends, like, capital B, capital L, capital M, Black Lives Matter, lowercase b, L, and M, Black Lives Matter. Yeah, right. Like, there's a big difference, and people don't understand it. And I fall into this trap sometimes where I forget that I'm like down deep in the trenches and these niches and in these subcultures, and I've been following them for years. I've been living their tactics, engaging with them. They've chased me around the city, calling death threats at me, and they've chased down my little league team and all these things. So to me, it's like, oh, this is common knowledge, but I just don't think that the knowledge is out there. And of course, we're fighting against the media and the politicians. And oh my God, I can't remember his name right now, Ellison, the guy from Minnesota, holding up the Antifa handbook. And like, maybe he doesn't even know what he's doing. All these people are just stooges. And I think we forget that people out there are just dumb. Even our politicians are dumb. Some of our national security people are dumb. And they just kind of roll with what they're given. It's tough to be critical and challenge what seems to be a dominant idea, and it's hard to be counter to the mainstream, and it takes balls, and it takes a certain risk structure in your life, I guess, to take a counter position. You have to be supported if you're going to get attacked, etc. So I'm a little disappointed with the response, but I am encouraged in some degree to Trump's recent rhetoric, right? Like, I think beginning back with the Mount Rushmore address, it became very clear that he was latching on to the idea that BLM and Antifa and critical race theory is anti-American, it's anti-founding. It promotes a notion of justice that runs contrary to the justice that was established by the founders. Thank you, Claremont. I've been learning about that along the way. And it's just clear that he's adopted that language, and in a very eloquent and powerful way with the rhetoric. And he's continued it on with his attacks on critical race theory in the federal government. Thank you, Christopher Rufo, who was also on this show last week or 2 weeks ago. And it does seem to me that he's taking this as attack. This is why I voted for him in the first place, was to fight against critical race theory. We call it just intersectionality or radical feminism, like 4 or 5 years ago. But they're still not doing enough. When I go downtown to Lafayette Square, 16th and H, Northwest Washington, D.C., and I see Black Lives Matter painted on the street in letters big enough to see from outer space. I see Black Lives Matter banners hanging off the buildings that had just recently been destroyed and attacked by Black Lives Matter. I see the flags hanging. I hear the drums beating. I watch coordinated people in the street, teams attacking the police in a systematic way that was replicated from other locations. They've got their flags. They've got their music. They've got the city. It's on a place called Black Lives Matter Plaza, right? It's like, we're obviously not doing enough. We're obviously not doing enough. And so my question to you now, Kyle, is what do we do? What do we do as citizens? What do we do as independent information sort of soldiers? What do we do as a nation? How do we split the insurgency? Is it a given that the corporations, Black Lives Matter and Antifa, are going to be in alignment forever? I don't think so. What do we do? What do we do, Kyle?
Well, I always start with the fact that you can't fight something with nothing. And so if the reason why these guys are so effective is because they know what they believe. They have their vision of what justice is, and they stick to it. And their view of justice is fundamentally opposite of ours if we're in alignment with the founder. I mean, think about how they made it impossible to say all lives matter. What could be truer, A, and B, what is more fundamental to the American way of life and our understanding of the world than all lives matter? Isn't all lives matter sort of the same thing as saying all men are created equal?
Indeed.
Right? And so ours is fun. They say, well, why can't you say that Black Lives Matter if Black lives are a part of all lives? Well, that is factually true. So all lives matter works. If I say all lives matter, then inherently all Black lives also matter. But to say that one set category to be focused on categories, to break people down into categories, is to attack the principle that all men are created equal, which is the fundamental attack on our view of justice.
Yes.
So if we have to start from there, we have to educate ourselves there as to what it is we believe. And then we have to live our doctrine in the same way that they choose to live their doctrine, right? So that will ground us in a place where we are prepared to take action. And then we have to educate people. I think it's really important to speak, especially to law enforcement and to military active duty and veterans, about what their responsibilities are to the Constitution, what their why their powers are derived from the Constitution, and how they have a responsibility to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And if you say, so what is the root cause of your purpose, right? As a police officer standing on that line when that guy is yelling at you or that gal is yelling at you, you have to be able to fall back on this notion that I understand why I am here and the role that I am playing in the defense of my country. So that is a bare minimum. If we can't do that, we can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
But having done that, we then have to institutionalize that. We have to move up the chain with law enforcement, federal, state, and local, and have them understand you have a responsibility to defend the Constitution. You have a responsibility to defend the public. You have a responsibility to defend the property of the public because of these beliefs and principles that we have. And you have to understand you have a responsibility to educate yourself as to why these threats are threats to that. And we can help you do that. I've been able to do a number of briefings to law enforcement and on Antifa. If you have any active duty law enforcement guys that want one, or can get a group together to do one, I'm happy to do that. You have a responsibility, as Sun Tzu says, to know the enemy and know yourself. So one, educate yourself, about what it is you believe. And then two, educate yourself on the enemy and what they believe. And I believe if you understand what they believe, you will be able to get in their head. You'll be able to see how they operate, and you'll be able to beat them. That's why I ultimately spend all this time talking about ideology and this, that, and the other, because if I understand the way you view the world, I can understand how you'll respond to different stimuli, and then I can try to beat you. Or more importantly, I can teach other people how to beat you.
I firmly believe in this know the enemy, know thyself. I recently had Alexander Dugin, the Russian political philosopher and geopolitical theorist, on the podcast. People ask me why I was giving him any airtime or putting him on my platform. And the reason why is because you got to know what they're thinking. You got to know what everybody is thinking. Dugin is an interesting character on a number of levels, but primarily you want to just know what they're thinking about in Moscow. Like, you want to know what their goals are and their frame of reference are, so that you can be better equipped to manage any future conflict. And you can also better understand who we are at the same time by comparison. And so knowledge is very important here, and information very important here. But what do we do once we understand? Let's just assume the administration understands the threat. Let's assume that a significant enough of the citizen population understands the threat. What do we do from there? Do we just arrest them as they commit crimes? Do we infiltrate them? What do we do?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. Actually, the U.S. government historically, federal law enforcement historically, has been really good at fighting these types of threats. Most people think about the FBI's defeat of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1960s when they conducted bombings against black churches and those kinds of things. But in fact, the FBI started targeting the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s, not because they were terrorists, but because they were a threat to the Constitution. They were seen as a subversive group targeting the Constitution, and so they were investigated for those reasons. And we have to get back to that. We have to get back to law enforcement operating on the basis of defending the Constitution and the American founding principles that are derived from it. So that if you understand the world in that way, that will enable you to make larger cases, right? Follow up. You said infiltrating Antifa is quite difficult because it is so decentralized, because it is so well networked, but it is possible. We have done it before. in other contexts, it is doable. But you have to first of all know or believe that there's a conspiracy worth infiltrating and investigating in order to do that. But we have the capacity to do that. If we want to do it, we can do it. Then, if we wanted to, we've been talking about Antifa solely domestically. The reality is they operate in a number of different countries. All throughout Western Europe and another number of other places, there are Antifa groups. That makes them an international threat. They move money internationally. They have the International Antifa Defense Fund, which collects money from various countries and moves it internationally to other countries. You could make the case that Antifa is a foreign terrorist organization on the basis of their international ties, which would give you a number of tools that we can apply to foreign terrorist organizations that we don't apply to domestic terror. Is that the right move? I'm not certain. It would be worth, I think, having the argument and having the discussion. There are a number of other law enforcement tools that exist to target groups that intend to overthrow the government. You are not supposed to be able to immigrate or get a visa to enter the United States if your goal is to overthrow it. It's actually in the law. It's not enforced very much anymore. The Trump administration actually just recently announced that they were going to start enforcing the law which prohibits visas or immigration on the basis of membership in a totalitarian party. So if you are a communist, you are not supposed to be able to get a visa to enter the United States. That would be somewhat helpful. So there are laws on the books that can be used. You just have to have the will to use them. And over the past, we defeated the communist urban insurgencies of the 1970s and 80s. But shortly after we did, there was an attack on all of these tools of government that the government used against those groups. And they were mostly removed or taken away. But we do know how to do this, and it can be done. We just you have to be willing to spend the political capital to use some of these laws, and then say, when you inevitably get challenged, as you will, by the National Lawyers Guild and the ACLU and all these other networks of leftist lawyers that existed to oppose these things, they will sue you, and you will have to fight them in court. Yeah. And you have to be prepared and willing to do that. And no president has been willing to do it yet. Trump might be that guy. He's done things that I didn't think were possible. And so we may see that he's willing to do that. He certainly understands, I think, that he has a duty to defend these things. So.
Yeah. Let's play cynic for a sec.
Not too hard.
Is there any advantage to letting Antifa play out their nonsense in the street? Does it help? Let's say our cause is preserving the Constitution and the spirit of the founding. Is there any advantage to letting Antifa run its course a little bit right now?
I can see a number of reasons why that might be true from a law enforcement perspective, especially if you're trying to get to the top of things. If you're infiltrating, if you're tracking and collecting the signals and all of these different things, the longer it plays on, the more data you collect. And this is the constant challenge, right? This is the challenge between law enforcement and district attorneys and intelligence guys. Do we stop them right now to prevent more violence and trouble? That's the sort of average law enforcement response. Do we let this play on so I have a little bit more evidence to show the jury? That's the typical district attorney response. And then you have the intelligence response is, let's just see where it goes, because the more I see, the more I collect, and the more I know. And so these things are all in tension, and you have to make decisions on the basis of it. I think if I had a confidence that that was happening, that we were doing that sort of collection, and we were building those sorts of cases, I would say let it play on. On the other hand, I'm not so sure they're doing that.
Yeah.
And I think there is a hunger from the American people to see law and order restored. And I think the candidate that does that will be, the candidate who convinces the people that he can do that will be the guy that wins. And right now you have President Trump, who takes the position that he is the law and order man. and that he's going to be hard on, these anarchists and terrorists. And then you have Joe Biden, who and the Democrats, who have taken a sort of, how do I put this in the most nonpartisan way? There's an element of, nice story you have there. It would be a shame if anything happened to it. An element of extortion where we know these guys and we can make this all go away if you just do what we want.
Right.
And that's the political fight. And that's, that's not my instinct, and I'm pretty sure it's not your instinct, Jack. But for a lot of people, that is a powerful motivation. That, if I go along to get along, all of this will go away.
Right.
And that is, I think, the fight.
Yeah. And that's definitely the approach that they're taking. Vote for us or else is the subtext of that as well. I think that there's some advantage in the long-term game to having as much of Antifa on display, BLM on display as possible. Our challenge is that, of course, the mainstream media does not pick up on this stuff, doesn't distribute it, continues to push, like Michelle Obama yesterday or 2 days ago, giving her whole speech about how there's no violence anywhere.
Isn't it interesting how these riots have disappeared?
Right.
You and I follow social media, and guys like Andy Ngo and the other guys in Portland. If you follow those guys, these things are still happening every single night.
Right.
And the media for a while found it advantageous to show you that. And you'll remember in the early days, they showed all of this stuff. And that was when they were trying to move the Overton window towards defund the police. But when it became clear that it was not helping them politically, you had Don Lemon, who explicitly said this. It's not good for the polls. This stuff needs to stop.
Right.
And then the media just stops reporting it. So I'm sure there are people out there who think that the riots have ceased. In fact, they have not ceased.
They have not in the least. And in DC, just to be totally perfectly clear, there has been a little, they have subsided some. At the end of May, early June was the most amount of property damage that I saw, the most amount of arson, violence, looting, and attacks on the police. But they've shifted their tactics now, and they always will, right? The response and tactics is a dialectic. They go in concert with each other, they respond to each other, and they create their own sort of trajectory based on the response of the counterparty. And what they've done now is, instead of just attacking federal buildings or whatever, because they've taken the police away, they start going into neighborhoods, and they start going into restaurants and eateries. And this is part of the reason why I got to get out of Washington, D.C., just literally walking distance, the closest commercial strip to my house. I've been to this restaurant before. They come up the street, they go to the restaurant outside, the people sitting on the patio, they come over the fence, they get in your face, and they scream at you, and they say, raise the fist, Black Lives Matter. If you don't, you're a racist, and you're okay with that. And then you have 50 people screaming at you. You've got the other patrons saying, just say it, make them leave. And, the tactics evolve and change. And so what I'm hoping to see is that, just like with critical race theory right now, the parents of America are starting to get hip to this, right? They're starting to understand that when they get the email about the ADL's book reading list and courageous conversations, and we're just going to have a talk about race, that's not as benign as it sounds. Everybody remembers doing current events in school. I always loved current events. But today it's like indoctrination events, courageous struggle sessions, etc. And the response I'm getting from American parents is just incredible. Like they're scared. They're starting to see it. They're starting to understand. They're starting to push back. People in my area are coordinating. There's parent groups that are evolving. I get emails every day from people, jurisdictions all around the country, who are starting to see this stuff. And then when they see the BLM Antifa terrorists go into the neighborhoods and harass people and force them to submit to their will, and they make it so, like, guys like me, we decide where to go out to eat based on, well, what's the riot rating tonight? Is there a chance of riots? Is it going to rain? Where should we go? I'm not kidding either. We deliberately pick where to go, where we're going to avoid this kind of confrontation. And I'm hoping that the more that we bring attention to this, and the more that they do dumb shit like attack, just regular folks going out to dinner, that they will begin to lose the information war a little bit, and that they will not only lose the moral element that they have, but they're going to motivate people to defend their children and to defend their homes and their neighborhoods. So there is some benefit, I think, to letting it play out a little bit. But then when you start talking about people getting killed, I mean, we're up to like 35 or 36 people murdered and killed during the summer riots, billions of dollars of property destruction. It's a tough game to play, to say, oh, just let them go kill some more people so that we can beat them in the end. So it's a tough thing to strategize. And my job, thankfully, isn't to come up with the ultimate solution, but to discover this information, disseminate the information, get it out there, get it onto YouTube, get it into Facebook, get it into people's living rooms and into their brains. And hopefully that will start to have some effect. What is your prognosis, Kyle? What do you think is going to happen in the next 4 months between now, election, and inauguration? And then, depending on who wins, which way do you see the winds blowing after that?
That's a really good question. So I wanted to comment on the struggle session part. And the thing that worries me about allowing that to play on is they did struggle sessions for a reason, which is that they know if they make you raise the fist and say Black Lives Matter, cognitive dissonance in your brain, which is a psychological effect that happens, right? You will try to orient your statements and your actions with what you really believe. And, psychologists have shown that people will orient what they believe in order to explain what they did.
Right.
And so they will say, well, I made the Black Lives Matter fist. It must be because that's what I believe. And this is a real thing that totalitarian states count on.
Yeah.
And play upon. So there's a reason why they do that. And there is a real risk that will work on some people.
Right. Because the counter psychology is, I am just weak and I got bullied. Right. So what are you?
Which nobody wants to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So longer term, I think, despite comments from various Democratic Party leaders in the media that this stuff needs to kind of simmer a little bit, I don't think it will. I think that the Antifa guys know that they're on a roll and they're going to keep going. And I don't think that the Democratic Party has enough authority to stop them. And they cannot alienate them. One, because fundamentally they believe the same things. They have the same understanding of justice, and they sort of buy these social justice claims. And so they have no room to argue with them. And two, they believe, I think, that the election will come down to, as the Transition Integrity Project called it, a street fight. For those of you not familiar, the Transition Integrity Project is this so-called bipartisan group of Democrats and never-Trumpers who did a war game to try to figure out what would happen in various election scenarios. And at least in one of them, it came down to a real quote-unquote street fight with protests and so on, where the Democrats were literally trying to drive the president from office because the president believes that he had won and that the Democrats had cheated, or the Democrats were trying to force the matter through revolutionary politics. And so if they believe, and I didn't do the study, they did the study, but if they believe it, then they will need all elements of their coalition. And they will need especially those elements of their coalition that provide street politics and physical revolutionary force. And so they cannot alienate BLM and Antifa so much so that they can't count on them when they need them. So they are in a bind. And when the president told Joe Biden that they will overthrow you, I think he saw that very clearly. And the Democrats are totally weakened because the Democratic Socialists of America, which are aligned with Antifa, have made strong inroads into the party. They very successfully primary a number of people. This is where you get Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York. She's out of DSA, and several other members of the squad are also DSA. So if you're Nancy Pelosi, you know you cannot go so far from your revolutionary left, or you risk losing people to primaries, and you risk being slandered and attacked by the same media that you usually count on. So the establishment Democrats have put themselves in a bind where they need these people, and they don't have the power or the influence to reject them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Counterexample, Donald Trump explicitly disavows white supremacy, KKK, Proud Boys even though I dispute that last one. It's fine for him to just say that, just to get the media off his back. And I believe that he means it. I know that everybody that I'm, hang out with on the MAGA right, we all disavow white supremacy, Nazis, all of that shit to the far right. But yet the center left folks don't disavow their radical left. Not only do they not disavow them, they kowtow to them. They give them what they demand. They're afraid of them. And I think we can all clearly feel the fact that the Democratic left is being controlled, manipulated by their radical left wing, their tyranny of the minority. Their party is being jerked radically to the left, which is why I am now I'm not an old school Republican by any means. I voted Democrat my whole life. I support Donald Trump and the mission that Donald Trump is on. And that's in part because the radical left yanked the Democrats so far leftward that they left guys like me standing in the middle all alone. And then I realized that, the basic common American themes and rights that I believe in are actually at jeopardy if the radical left, which is not even so radical anymore, continues to take power. And we've seen the impact that a minority can have on our institutions. People have taken over science. They've taken over the academia. They've taken over the American Psychological Association, the United Nations. They've taken over every friggin' institution in America through small numbers of just extreme effort. And then they change the policies and procedures, which have a whole systemic impact. And so it's a good counterpoint to say, if you are a centrist and you're a Trumpist, you're like, look, we reject our radical right. The center left does not reject their radical left. And so we know that if they win, they're going to give in to them. They're going to try to do the Green New Deal and all the nonsense that goes with that. They're not going to fight critical race theory. They're not going to push back against BLM and Antifa. In fact, they're only going to get more powerful. So let me ask you, Kyle, this will be the last question. We can wrap up here. Tremendous podcast so far. Thank you so much. This information has been really valuable.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. So what happens? Trump wins. What does BLM Antifa do? Biden wins. What does BLM Antifa do?
So I think if Trump wins, first of all, we're going to see a lot of activity from them in between the period where the election is held and the president is inaugurated. I would definitely expect the same kind of G20 stuff we saw in 2016, only more so this time around if the president wins again. I think they will continue to push for a while, and eventually they will either be suppressed or they will quiet down if they feel like they're not having an effect. And they'll take the things that they learned this time around, they will put them into their doctrines, and next time they feel it's advantageous to take to the streets, they will do so, having learned all the lessons of this past year. If Biden wins, I think that you see agitation continue, especially in order to push Biden to the left. We've seen statements from Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Harris herself, that indicated that they know that Biden can be pushed to the left, and so they're going to need to do that. So they'll push him further and further to the left. They'll demand certain appointments for the radical left, and they'll probably get them. The actual violence on the street may die down once they get that. And they will again be prepared and ready for the next time that they're needed to force their demands. or ultimately unseat Biden and take charge. That is their goal and their hope, and it's not impossible. If we are in, as the Antifa types certainly believe, if we are in an age of revolutionary politics, this stuff has worked before. If you look at the 1948 coup in Czechoslovakia, the communists agitated and they pushed the socialists and the left to give them more positions and more power and more influence, and they took more and more authority, and they took over policing, and they took over justice, and they took over various departments. And then when they had everything that they needed, they pushed the socialists out of the way and they took control. That is the way they view the world. Are they there yet? I don't know. I think America is stronger than that. At least I'm hopeful that it is. But that is the way they view the world. And so I believe that is what they would seek to do if the opportunity arose.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it sounds like things are going to get worse for a little bit before they get better. With Trump, you probably will see Antifa BLM have a crazed spasm reaction in protest. I'm anticipating election night through January to be pretty busy. And then if he does get inaugurated, holy crap, they're going to try to burn down the whole city. And then maybe Trump can take care of them from there, or they double down and they get even crazier. And then who knows what happens if the Democrats win. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say you could see them go underground and move to the Weather Underground bombing and assassination model. I don't believe that will be the case, just because they found out it wasn't effective last time.
Yeah.
But it's, because you remember you had the spasms of street violence in these, at the Democratic convention, and when that didn't work, then they went underground,
right?
And they started their bombings and the armored car robberies and the kidnappings and all of this crazy stuff. So it's possible they could go in that direction. I don't know.
Yeah, and since we've seen them, Antifa as an idea and an organization and a movement, action-oriented idea, which makes them a thing. We've seen them go underground when they need to. We've seen them slither from one environment to the next. We've seen them mutate and evolve. And so it's likely that they will never go away. But there is a chance, if Trump is elected, that there will be a flash and then perhaps a pause. If Biden is elected, my belief is that they're going to do everything they can to continue to drag them to the left, continue to impact the agenda and the political discourse. And God forbid that there's going to be some sort of truth and reconciliation program that takes place. That's code word for, come after all of us and end us and cancel us and kill us in a Biden administration, where they think to themselves, okay, this Trump thing was a one-time event. It's an anomaly. It's an aberration, and we have to just extinguish it right now. And we have to put these people away and make sure. This is my big fear, that Biden gets elected, and then this attitude of we got to make sure this will never happen again. And this is Trump, that this Trump thing will never happen again. And so they're going to be very active in making sure to extinguish any remnants of the Trump administration, Trump supporters, Trumpism, any of the policies or ideas that he's tried to implement. So it's going to be a crazy time coming up, man. That's really all there is to it. Kyle, thank you. Oh, yeah, you want to say one more thing here?
Well, I was just going to say, people should remember that the IRS targeting of conservatives happened under the Obama administration, that the Ferguson riots happened in the Obama administration. So the idea that these sorts of things go away, or that people that spoke out or ran organizations, or, as Trump leaves government and seeks to set up, some kind of nonprofit to continue to move forward with his ideas, that these things can't be targeted, I think is wrong. I mean, I think they will be targeted. So, and again, as I said, Ferguson happened under Obama. So don't think that we won't see more disorder, more riots, more insurrection, just because we have a Democratic administration. I don't think that's the case.
Definitely not going to be the case whatsoever. In fact, they may be emboldened. And so the post 2020 election period is one that's fraught with uncertainty and it does look to be sort of chaotic moving forward. So, Kyle, let's touch base again in a couple of months and see where things are. Thank you so much for giving us your time and energy today. Your expertise is invaluable on this matter. I hope that Congress and our national security apparatus listen to you more and they pay closer attention to what's going on. You're doing great work. I really appreciate your time and energy. Stick around with me for a second after we sign off. But Kyle Shideler, ladies and gentlemen, please find him at the Center for Security Policy. My name is Jack Murphy. Find me on Jack Murphy Live, jackmurphylive.com. Get the book, Democrat to the Deplorable. And if you want to be part of an info militia, if you want to be a part of a group of men that make it their goal to understand the world today and preserve our values of masculinity, sovereignty, and brotherhood, come down, check out the Liminal Order at liminal-order.com. Thank you, everybody. We'll be back soon. Upcoming guests include John Robb, Alun Bakari, and this gentleman who wrote a book called War for Eternity about Dugan, Bannon, and Olavo. It's going to be fascinating. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Catch you later on Jack Murphy Live. Thank you.